My 51st birthday was supposed to be quiet. I chose the place myself, a small restaurant near the water in Seattle, nothing loud, nothing crowded. Just a table, a glass of whiskey, and the kind of silence that usually meant everything was still in place. I remember checking my watch once. Not impatient, just habit. Then the door opened. Laura walked in. She didn't hesitate, didn't scan the room like someone arriving late. She knew exactly where I was. What caught me wasn't her. It was the man beside her. I had never seen him before. Mid-40s, maybe. Confident in a way that didn't belong in my life. They walked straight to the table. No introduction. No pause. She sat down across from me like this was already decided. The man took the seat next to her. A second later, our daughters followed and sat beside her without looking at me. That part settled something in my chest before anyone said a word. This wasn't a conversation. Laura folded her hands on the table. Calm. Practiced. I'm leaving, she said. I can't live this life anymore. No emotion in it. Just a statement. I looked at my daughters. They didn't look back. One of them gave a small clap. The other followed. Not loud. Not dramatic. But deliberate enough that I understood what I was looking at. Not a moment. A decision that had already been made. I nodded once, more to myself than to them, and reached for my glass. The ice had already melted. We lived a simple life. Not small, just predictable. Work in the morning, dinner at the same time most nights. Weekends that followed a pattern we never had to discuss. Grocery runs on Saturdays, laundry on Sundays. The same shows playing quietly in the background while we sat on opposite ends of the couch. It wasn't exciting, but I never thought it was supposed to be. I believe consistency was the point. Laura used to agree with that. Or at least she never said otherwise. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came in pieces small enough to ignore if you wanted to. And I did. Her work started requiring travel. That was the explanation. Conferences, client meetings, things that sounded reasonable when said out loud. At first it was once a month. Then twice. Then it stopped being something we talked about and just became part of the schedule. The girls changed too, but I explained that away even faster. They were older now, more independent, less interested in sitting around with their parents. That's what I told myself when they stopped asking about my day. When conversations got shorter. When their attention shifted somewhere I couldn't follow. Looking back, it wasn't one thing. It was repetition. Laura started taking calls in other rooms. Not hiding them, just relocating them. Her tone changed depending on who she was speaking to. Softer sometimes. More focused. I noticed it, but I didn't question it. I told myself it was work. She bought new clothes. Nothing dramatic. Just enough that I noticed they weren't part of her usual rotation. Different shoes. A different perfume that stayed in the air longer after she left the room. I registered all of it, but I didn't connect it. It's easier to believe in phases than in endings. 6 weeks before that dinner, I already knew. Not everything. Not the full shape of it. But enough that the explanations I'd been using stopped holding together. It started with something small, a location tag on a receipt she left in the car. Portland. A place she hadn't mentioned. I remember turning it over in my hand longer than necessary, like the answer might be printed somewhere I hadn't looked yet. I didn't ask her about it. A few days later, I saw another one. Same area. Different date. That's when it stopped being something I could ignore. Still not proof. Just repetition. Patterns don't need to be loud to be clear. I checked the calendar we kept on the kitchen wall. Her work trips lined up with those dates. That should have explained it. Instead, it made it worse. The timing was too consistent. The same days of the week. The same short gaps in between. I started paying attention to details I used to overlook. Flight confirmations left open on her laptop. Not hidden, just there long enough to see if you happened to be passing by. Rental car charges that didn't match the city she mentioned. Small things, but they stacked. One night, she told me she'd be in San Diego. Her phone location said Portland. I didn't confront her. Not because I was unsure, but because I wasn't looking for an argument. I was looking for clarity. There's a difference. That's when something in me shifted. I stopped trying to make sense of her words and started watching her actions instead. No assumptions. No accusations. Just observation. The same address appeared more than once. Quietly, consistently. Not random. Not accidental. I wrote it down. Not because I needed to remember, but because I needed to acknowledge it. That was the moment I understood I wasn't dealing with a phase. I was looking at something established. And once you see a pattern clearly, you don't unsee it. I didn't say anything. Not when I first saw the receipts. Not when the locations stopped matching the stories. Not even when the pattern became something I could map out on paper. There wasn't a moment where I confronted her, raised my voice, or asked for an explanation. That version of me had already started to step back. Instead, I adjusted quietly. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. I opened a separate bank account on a Tuesday morning before work. Same branch I'd used for years. Same teller. No urgency in the process, no visible reason for it. Just a shift, small on the surface, permanent underneath. I redirected part of my paycheck the following week. Not everything. Just enough to begin separating what had always been shared. I reviewed our finances in detail for the first time in years. Not broadly, line by line. Subscriptions, automatic payments, recurring charges. I wasn't looking for mistakes. I was creating distance. A few days later, I signed a lease on a small apartment across town. Nothing special. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, quiet building with no view worth mentioning. It wasn't about comfort. It was about having a place that existed outside of what I knew was already ending. I didn't move anything in right away. Just the keys in my pocket, a space waiting. The lawyer came next. Recommendation from someone at work. We met once, briefly. I didn't bring emotion into that room. Just facts. Dates. Financial structure. What I knew, and what I could document. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He didn't need to. This wasn't a reaction. It was preparation. At home, nothing changed on the surface. Dinner still happened. Conversations still moved the way they always had. Short, functional, incomplete. Laura spoke about her trips the same way, with the same level of detail. The girls stayed distant, but consistent in that distance. I stopped expecting anything different. That was the real break. Not anger. Not confrontation. Just the quiet acceptance that what I had been living in no longer existed, and hadn't for a while. Once I stopped reacting, everything became easier to see. There's a difference between living inside something and stepping just far enough outside to watch it happen. I didn't change my routine. I didn't withdraw or become distant in a way that would raise questions. I just paid attention in a way I hadn't before. Laura's story stayed consistent. That was the first thing I noticed. Not consistent in truth, consistent in structure. Same phrases, same sequence of details, the same way she described airports, meetings, dinners. It sounded rehearsed, but not in an obvious way. More like something she had repeated enough times that it no longer required effort. I started noting the days. Tuesdays and Thursdays, mostly. Occasionally a Sunday. Those were the days she was gone, regardless of what city she claimed to be in. It didn't matter what explanation she used. The timing stayed fixed. The address in Portland matched those days almost perfectly. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. Patterns remove the need for confirmation when they're clear enough. The girls adjusted around it. That was harder to watch than anything Laura did. They knew the schedule. You could see it in small ways. How they planned around her absences. How they avoided certain conversations when she was home. They weren't confused. They were aligned. Eye contact became rare. Not avoided entirely, just reduced. Enough that it felt intentional. When I spoke, they answered, but without engagement. No questions back. No curiosity. Like they were maintaining a surface interaction without stepping into anything deeper. I didn't push. Observation works best without interference. I started keeping track mentally at first. Then I wrote things down. Not obsessively. Just enough to establish sequence. Dates, times, overlaps. When something repeated more than twice, I marked it. Everything repeated. Her tone on certain calls. The way she stepped outside at specific hours. The gap between when she said she landed and when her phone actually reconnected. None of it dramatic, but all of it consistent. And consistency tells the truth without needing explanation. At some point, it stopped being contained inside the house. Up until then, everything I had seen could be framed as personal, private decisions, private behavior, something limited to the space between us. But the more I tracked the details, the more I realized it wasn't staying there. Laura's trips weren't just consistent in timing. They were consistent in who they overlapped with. Names started repeating, not directly from her. She was careful with that, but through secondary connections. Emails left open, calendar entries visible for a few seconds too long, references made in passing that didn't quite match the roles she described. Clients I had heard about before, but now attached to dates that didn't align with the work she claimed to be doing. The address in Portland wasn't isolated. It connected outward. I found it tied to a small consulting office. Nothing public-facing in a major way, but established enough to leave a trail. Business registrations, shared partnerships, financial filings that linked back to companies I recognized from her work. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was structure. Her relationship existed inside that structure. That changed the scope. I wasn't looking at something hidden in the margins. I was looking at something that overlapped with her professional life, her obligations, people who operated under the assumption that everything was legitimate. Documents reflected that overlap. Expense reports that didn't match travel logs. Dates that appeared in two places at once. Small discrepancies that, individually, meant nothing, but together formed something that could be verified. I didn't interfere. That part mattered. Once something extends beyond the personal, it doesn't need to be exposed directly. It reveals itself over time, through the people connected to it. All I had to do was step back far enough to let those connections come into focus. And they did. Gradually, without force. People notice patterns when they affect them. Schedules that don't align. Deliverables that shift. Commitments that start to break in small, measurable ways. It doesn't happen all at once. It accumulates. I could see that accumulation starting. Not loudly, but clearly enough that I knew I wasn't the only one who would eventually recognize it. After the dinner, Laura tried to talk. Not immediately. She waited until we were outside, near the parking lot, where the noise of the street gave the illusion of privacy. The man stayed behind. That told me enough about his role in all of it. She walked beside me, not quite matching my pace. "Can we at least have a conversation?" she asked. Her voice was controlled, careful, like she had already decided what tone this required. I stopped near the car, but didn't turn toward her right away. I let a few seconds pass, just enough to separate what had happened inside from whatever this was supposed to be. "I'm listening," I said. That used to mean something different. She started explaining. Not everything, just selected parts. Words like unhappy, disconnected, needing something more. General enough to sound reasonable. Vague enough to avoid specifics. I had heard variations of it before, just never this directly. "I didn't plan for it to happen like this," she said. "It just developed." I nodded once. There was a time I would have asked questions. Asked when it started, why she didn't say anything, what she expected me to do with that information. That instinct wasn't there anymore. Because I already had the timeline. I already knew the pattern. This wasn't new information. It was a version of events shaped to sound acceptable. "I think we both knew things weren't working," she added. That part almost sounded rehearsed. I looked at her then. Really looked. Not searching for something. Just confirming what was already clear. "No," I said. "You knew?" She paused at that. Just for a second. "I tried," she said quickly. I stayed. I kept things going. I didn't respond to that. Effort without honesty doesn't hold much weight. She shifted her approach. "This doesn't have to be difficult," she continued. "We can handle it calmly. For the girls." That word, calmly, stood out. As if what happened at that table had been anything else. "I agree," I said. She seemed to take that as progress. "I don't want this to turn into something ugly," she said. "It won't," I replied. And I meant it. Not because things were being resolved, but because I was no longer participating in the version of this she was trying to manage. She was speaking to someone who used to react. That person wasn't there anymore. After that night, I didn't have to do anything. That was the part most people wouldn't understand. There was no moment where I stepped in, no attempt to control the outcome or accelerate it. I had already done everything that mattered before that dinner ever happened. What came next moved on its own. The legal process started quietly. Documents filed, timelines established, assets outlined with a level of precision that didn't require discussion. My lawyer handled communication. I didn't need to be involved beyond confirmation. Everything we had built was reduced to structure. Accounts, property, obligations. Clean divisions where possible, clear boundaries where not. Laura tried to stay involved in those conversations at first. Emails, suggested terms, attempts to shape how things would proceed. I didn't respond directly. There was nothing left to negotiate emotionally, and the practical side had already been addressed. The girl stayed with her. That wasn't a decision made in a single moment. It had been forming long before anything became official. Their alignment was already there. I didn't challenge it. Forcing something at that point would have created conflict without changing the outcome. Work began to shift around her. Not suddenly. Not in a way that could be traced back to one event. But the inconsistencies I had been tracking didn't disappear. They expanded into other areas. Missed expectations. Questions from people who relied on her being where she said she would be. Small concerns that started to overlap. That's how it spreads. Quietly at first, then with enough weight that it can't be ignored. I heard about some of it indirectly. Not details, just changes in tone when her name came up. Less certainty. More hesitation. It wasn't my place to involve myself, and I didn't. The relationship she had built outside the marriage followed the same pattern. What exists in secrecy depends on control. Once that control starts to slip, through timing, through exposure, through the simple pressure of being seen from multiple angles, it changes. Expectations shift. Roles become less clear. I didn't need to see it happen. I understood the structure well enough to know how it would end. So I let it. Step by step, without interference, everything moved toward its own conclusion. I packed in stages. Not because there was a lot to take, but because there was no reason to rush it. The apartment I had rented weeks earlier was already set up with the basics. A bed, a table, a few things I had moved quietly over time. What remained in the house wasn't essential. It was just what had been left behind. I chose a weekday morning. Laura wasn't there. The girls were out. The house was exactly as it had been for years, quiet, organized, familiar in a way that no longer meant anything. I walked through each room once before touching anything, not out of hesitation, but to confirm that I wasn't leaving something unresolved. There was nothing to resolve. I packed clothes first. Practical, straightforward. Then documents, copies of everything I had already secured elsewhere. A few tools from the garage. Items that belonged to me in a clear, definable way. I didn't take anything that required explanation. The rest stayed. Photos remained on the walls. Furniture stayed in place. Objects that once held meaning were just part of the structure now. Removing them wouldn't have changed anything. Leaving them didn't either. I worked without interruption. No calls. No messages. My phone stayed in my pocket, silent. There was no need to announce what I was doing or to mark the moment in any way. The decision had been made long before I walked through the door that morning. When I finished, I stood in the entryway for a minute. Not reflecting, not remembering, just acknowledging that this was the last time I would be there as part of that life. I picked up the last box, stepped outside, and closed the door behind me. No hesitation. No second look. The key stayed on the counter inside. I didn't lock it. By the time they realized I was gone, it wouldn't require explanation. Everything that needed to be understood had already been set in motion. I drove away without turning on the radio. Just the sound of the engine, steady and consistent, carrying me somewhere that didn't need to be defined yet. It took time before that night stopped showing up in my thoughts. Not because I tried to forget it. I didn't. I just stopped assigning it any weight. It became a point in a sequence, not the center of it. The apartment settled into routine. Work stayed the same. Mornings started early. Days stayed structured. Evenings quiet. No noise that didn't belong. No conversations that needed to be managed. I heard things occasionally. Updates that reached me indirectly. None of it required a response. What had been my life didn't come back. It became something else. And over time, I realized I wasn't measuring that change against anything. I wasn't comparing it to what it used to be. It stood on its own. That was enough. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.